Everybody out here has a ledger. Some men keep theirs in a strong box. Mine I kept in a little water-stained book I carried against my chest, and in it I wrote down everything the Coldwater country ever took from me. Cattle, winters, a brother, a wife once, though I only ever wrote her name and never the date because I couldn't make my hand do it. I'm telling you that so you understand what kind of man I was the night I found her. Not a kind one. Not a soft one. A man who had learned that the smartest thing you can do in a blizzard is keep your head down, mind your own animals, and let the country have whatever it's already decided to take. And then a shape came up out of the white ahead of me, and it fell, and it did not get up. I could have ridden past. God help me, I thought about it. What happened after I didn't is the reason I'm an old man telling you this at all, because that one stubborn woman, half frozen and out of her mind with grief, taught a hard old ledger keeper something he'd spent 30 years refusing to learn. Stay with me. This one changed everything, and I don't say that lightly. I've got the book to prove I never say it lightly. The snow came sideways that night, which is the worst kind. Straight down snow you can ride through. Sideways snow gets into the seams of you, up your cuffs, down your collar, into the corners of your eyes so you're weeping without any feeling behind it, and it lies to you about which way is home. I'd been out too long and I knew it. That's the first thing you should understand about me. I knew better. 61 years old that winter, and I'd buried enough men who didn't know better that I had no business being caught out. But a heifer had wandered off the home pasture toward the creek, and a heifer in January is $30 I couldn't spare. So I'd gone after her like a fool, and the weather had turned on me the way it does in the Coldwater, no warning. Just a low gray ceiling coming down like a lid on a pot. My horse was a mean old dun named Sorry, on account of that being the only word I ever said to him. Sorry, boy. Sorry about the weather. Sorry about the work. He had a nose for home that I trusted more than my own sense, and I'd given him his head and let him carry me, and I was somewhere between the creek and the county road when the shape came up out of the white. At first I took it for a stump, then for a dead animal. The snow does that, makes everything into a question. And then the shape moved, put out one arm against the ground like it was trying to push the whole earth away from itself, and folded down again, and I understood I was looking at a person. I want to be honest with you, because I promised the reader honesty, and a man my age has no time left to lie. My first thought was not save her. My first thought was a low, ugly, exhausted little voice that said, whoever that is already gone, and you'll die trying to make it otherwise, and nobody will thank you for 2 frozen bodies instead of 1. I've spent 40 years wishing I could tell you I didn't think that. I did. I want you to know I did, because everything that came after only matters if you know what it grew out of. I sat there on Sorry maybe 3 seconds. Then I said the word I always said, sorry, and I didn't rightly know who I was saying it to, and I swung down. The wind hit me full when I left the horse's lee, and I nearly went down myself. I got my hand fisted in Sorry's mane and I pushed through it, a step at a time, leaning into the cold like it was a wall I was trying to move. The shape got clearer. A woman. Long coat, no proper hat, hair frozen in ropes across her face. On her hands and knees in the snow, and even as I watched she was still going, not away from me. She didn't know I was there. She was crawling. Toward nothing. Toward more white. Some engine still turning over inside her, telling her to move, 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 even after her legs had quit and her mind had likely quit with them. I have seen a lot of dying. I'd never seen anything like that. That crawl. It wasn't hope. She was too far gone for hope. It was just refusal, pure and stubborn and mindless as a thing can be, a body that had not yet been told it was allowed to stop. I got down on my knees in front of her and put my hands on her shoulders, and she fought me. That's the part nobody believes when I tell it. Half dead, blue at the lips, and she swung at me, a slow, clumsy, terrible little blow that didn't have the strength to move a cat off a fence, and she made a sound in her throat that wasn't a word, that was just no. I've thought about that sound more nights than I'd care to count. She was fighting a rescue. Some part of her had decided, somewhere back in the white, that the only thing left in the world worth doing was to keep going toward whatever she was going toward, and any hand that stopped her was an enemy. "Easy," I said. "Easy now, easy," which is what you say to a horse, and I hadn't got any better words. "I've got you, easy." She quit, not because she trusted me, because she was out of fight. Her head went down against my shoulder and she went slack, and for one bad moment I thought I'd got there just in time to hold a dead woman, which is a thing I would not wish on the worst man I ever knew. But she was breathing, fast and shallow and wrong, but breathing. Now I'll tell you about the ledger, because it matters here. I kept a book. My whole life I kept a book of what the country took. It started as a real ledger, cattle and money, back when I ran my own outfit before the winter of the deep snow took most of my herd and all of my nerve for owning things. After that I hired out and the book turned into something else, a place where I wrote down losses that didn't have a dollar figure. Brother Tom, the flood. Woman, bait, spring. No dates. I couldn't write the dates. I told myself it was a practical habit, a thing a careful man did, but the truth was uglier and simpler. I had decided, somewhere along the years, that the country was a thief and my only dignity was to keep an accurate count of what it stole. If I couldn't stop the theft, by God I could at least witness it. That's a cold way to live. I know that now. I didn't then. And kneeling there in the snow with a stranger going slack against me, some part of my mind, the part that had never once stopped keeping the count, was already writing her in. Woman, unknown, blizzard, already filing her under theft, already making her a number in a book of things I couldn't hold on to. I want to tell you the moment I decided not to let her be a number, but it wasn't a decision. That's the thing about the real ones. They don't feel like choices. They feel like your hands doing something before your head has voted on it. I got her up over the front of my saddle. It took everything I had. A grown woman is heavier than she looks, and a limp one is heavier still, and my back had been giving me grief since October, and the wind kept trying to take us both. Sorry stood for it. God bless his mean old heart, stood like a stone while I heaved and cursed, and finally got her folded over the pommel like a sack of feed, which is no dignified way to carry a person, and I've apologized to her for it 100 times since, and she's laughed at me every time. Then I climbed up behind her and I put one arm around her to hold her on, and I said, "Home, boy, take us home." And Sorry, who knew the way better than I did, put his head down into the wind and took us. I don't remember most of that ride. That's the truth. The cold does something to time. I remember pieces. I remember her weight against my arm and the way I kept shifting to feel her breathe, because I'd got it into my head that if I stopped feeling it, she'd stop doing it, which is not how breathing works, but is exactly how fear works. I remember talking to her. The whole way. Nonsense, mostly. Telling her about the cabin, about the stove, about how she'd be warm soon, about how I had coffee and it was terrible coffee, but it was hot. I don't think she heard a word. I think I was talking to keep myself from writing her into the book. As long as I was promising her a warm stove, I couldn't file her under lost. The cabin came up out of the snow the way things do out here, not there, not there, and then suddenly there, dark and low and half-drifted, the best thing I ever saw. I got her down. I don't know how. I got her inside and I got the door shut against the wind, and the sudden quiet of it after hours of that howl was like going deaf. Then came the long night, and I'll tell you about it plain, because there's a thing people get wrong about kindness. They think it's a warm feeling. It isn't. Real kindness, the kind that costs, is mostly just unpleasant work you do anyway. I got her wet coat off her, and it was frozen so stiff I had to crack it like a shell. I got her by the fire. Her hands were the color of a dead man's, and I knew enough to know you don't put frozen hands straight to heat. You warm them slow, in water no hotter than blood, or you do more harm than the cold did. So I hauled snow and melted it, and tested it against my own wrist over and over like a nervous mother. And I sat there through the small hours holding a stranger's ruined hands in a basin of lukewarm water, changing it when it cooled, watching the color come back into her fingers one terrible degree at a time. She came around near dawn. I'd fallen into a half-doze in the chair, her hands still in my keeping, and I woke to her looking at me. Just looking. Not afraid, which surprised me. Not grateful either, which surprised me more. Just a flat, hollowed-out kind of looking, the look of someone who has been somewhere the rest of us don't get to come back from and isn't sure yet whether she's glad she did. "You should have left me," she said. Those were her first words to me. Not thank you. Not where am I, just that, in a voice like a dry hinge. You should have left me. And here's where I'll tell you her name, because she gave it to me a minute later once she'd gathered herself, in the tone of a woman handing over something she'd rather keep. Nora Vane, widow of a homestead 2 ridges east, a place called the Halloway Claim that I knew by reputation as some of the hardest ground in the county, thin soil, mean water, a house her husband had built too close to the wash. Elias Vane. I'd met him twice at the Mercantile in Coldwater. Big laugh, big plans. The kind of man the country loves to break because he keeps standing back up and giving it another target. He died in November. I didn't know that yet. I'd find it out in pieces over the next days, the way you find out everything true about a person, sideways, in fragments, in the things they say when they think they're saying something else. "I don't leave people," I told her, which wasn't strictly true. I'd been about to, 3 seconds worth of about to, but it was true enough, and it was the man I wanted to be, if not quite the man I was. She looked at me a while longer. Then she looked down at her hands in the basin, at my old cracked hands holding them, and something moved across her face that she shut down fast, the way you'd shut a door against weather. "Well," she said, "you've made a mistake. I'll be honest that the first days were not the days you'd imagine, if you imagine this kind of story going the way they usually go. There was no gratitude. There was no soft moment by the fire. There was a woman who had walked out into a blizzard on purpose. I understood that by the second day, and I understood, too, that saying it out loud would break something we both needed to stay whole a while longer. And there was a stubborn old fool who did not know how to take care of a person and would not admit it. She was sick for a stretch. The cold gets in and takes its rent even after you're warm. Fever, a cough that scared me, a night where her breathing got so shallow I sat up against the wall with my ledger in my lap and did not write in it, just held it, like a man holds a hat at a graveside, the closest thing I had to prayer. I'd long since quit the praying kind. But I sat there and I did not write woman, Nora, blizzard, and it felt like the hardest not doing of my life. She lived. Of course she lived, you knew she lived. I'm telling you the story, she's the reason I'm telling it. But you didn't feel it that night, and I didn't either, and I want you to sit in that not knowing with me for a second, because it's the only way the rest of it lands. When the fever broke, she was changed. Not better, emptier. The fight that had carried her crawling through the snow had all gone somewhere, and what was left was a quiet, careful woman who did small tasks with great precision and would not meet your eye. She mended a shirt of mine without being asked, mended it beautifully, and when I thanked her she looked at the shirt like she couldn't remember doing it. And little by little, in fragments, I got the shape of it. Elias had died of a burst appendix, of all the plain stupid ways for a big man with big plans to go. 3 days of him telling her it was nothing, that it was something he ate, that he'd be fine by morning. 3 days of a man too proud and too broke to send for a doctor 12 miles off in weather, and then he wasn't fine by morning, and there was no more morning for him at all. She'd buried him herself. She told me that part flat, no tears, in the middle of scrubbing a pot. I buried him myself. Ground was hard. Took me 2 days. Scrub, scrub. I broke the shovel on the second day and finished with a fence rail. 2 days. To bury the man she loved. Because the ground was frozen and there was no one to help and she would not leave him to the coyotes. So she took 2 days and a broken shovel and a fence rail, and she did it alone. Because it needed doing, and she was the only one there to do it. That's when I started to understand what I'd pulled out of the snow. Not a woman who'd given up. A woman who had spent every last thing she had, dug a grave with a fence rail, held a homestead alone through the start of the worst winter in years, done and done and done, until there was simply nothing left in her to do with. And then, when the doing ran out, she'd walked into the white because the doing was the only thing that had ever kept her upright, and without it she didn't know how to stand. Endurance isn't a warm thing either. That's the second thing people get wrong. They think it's noble, endurance, all straight backs and stirring music. Up close it's a woman scrubbing a pot at midnight because if she stops moving her hands she'll have to feel the whole weight of it at once. And she knows, the way you know about a bad tooth, that the whole weight at once would kill her. I knew that woman. God help me, I was that woman in my own way with my ledger and my count and my refusal to write the dates. We were the same animal. We just kept our not stopping in different books. The blizzard blew itself out and left the world white and silent and mean-looking, and the days got into a rhythm, and I'd be lying if I told you the rhythm was easy. She wanted to leave. She was mortified to be beholden, a proud woman in a stranger's cabin, eating a stranger's food, wearing a dead man's shirt I'd given her because her clothes were ruined. She talked about getting back to her claim. I talked about the snow, the passes, the plain suicide of a woman alone crossing two ridges in January. We circled each other like that for a week. Two hard people, each one certain that needing anything was a kind of defeat. And then came the morning that turned it, and I'll end part one here because it's the right place to end it. On the morning I found her out by the woodpile at first light, before I was even properly awake, splitting my wood. Splitting my wood. In the cold, in the dark, in a borrowed coat, with a bad axe and worse hands still half-healed from the frost, swinging that axe like her life depended on it, which I suppose in the only way that mattered to her, it did. Splitting my wood because she could not stand to be given something for nothing, because the only way she knew how to be alive was to be useful, because a woman who has dug a grave with a fence rail does not know how to sit by a fire and simply be kept warm. I stood in the doorway and watched her a minute in the gray light, her breath smoking, the axe rising and falling. That same engine turning over that I'd seen in the snow, move, 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 except now it had somewhere to go. Now it was building a woodpile instead of crawling toward death, and I understood all at once, standing there in my socks in the cold, that the only difference between a person destroying themselves and a person saving themselves is sometimes nothing more than which direction you point the not stopping. I could have called out something soft. I didn't. She'd have hated soft. I went and got the other axe and I split wood beside her, and we didn't say a word, the two of us, just the crack and crack and crack of it in the frozen dark. Two people who didn't know how to be helped, helping each other by the only means either of us understood. That was the simple act, not the rescue in the snow. That was just a body doing what a body does. The simple act was the second axe, the choosing to stand beside her in the cold and match her swing for swing instead of telling her to come inside and rest. I didn't know yet that it would change everything. I only knew my back hurt and the wood needed splitting, and for the first winter in longer than I could count, I wasn't doing it alone. I said the second axe changed everything. I didn't say it changed everything fast. Things don't move fast when you're old and she's grieving, and the snow is 4 feet deep across the only road out. What the second axe changed was the weather between us. After that morning there was less ice in the cabin than there was outside it, which for two people like us was practically a spring thaw. We fell into a way of being. She wouldn't be idle, so I quit fighting it and started giving her the work outright. Here's the harness needs mending. Here's the account book I never could keep straight. Here's the mare with the bad hoof. See what you make of it. And she was good. That's a thing I hadn't expected and should have. A woman doesn't hold a homestead alone through the death of her husband and the start of a killing winter by being helpless. She was better with the mare than I was. She kept my accounts in a hand so neat it shamed my whole ledger. She had opinions about how I ran things, and most of them were right, and telling her so was the first thing in years that made me feel young. But I want to tell you about the hard middle, because a story that skips the hard middle is a lie, and I promised you I wouldn't lie. The hard middle was this. About 3 weeks in, a stretch of clear weather opened the road, and a man came up it. Coldwater's a small place, and small places talk, and word had gone around that Amos Kettle had a woman up at his cabin, the vain widow, no less, the one who'd buried her husband with a fence rail, the one folks had started to whisper about in that way small places whisper about a woman who's been through too much and might not be right in the head anymore. The man who came up the road was named Harmon Boyd, and he held the paper on the Vane claim. I'll say it plain. Elias Vane had died owing money, the way big plans men do, and Boyd held the note, and Boyd had come to tell Nora that the claim was his now unless she could pay what was owed by spring, and that as a courtesy, he actually used that word courtesy, he'd come to let her know in person rather than have the sheriff do it. I watched her face while he talked. We were all three of us standing out front in the cold, Boyd on his good horse looking down at us, and I watched Nora's face do the thing I'd seen it do that first morning, the shutting of the door against weather. And I watched her not fall down. That claim was the last thing of Elias she had left, the house he'd built too close to the wash, the ground she'd broken her shovel in. And this man on his good horse was telling her it was going to be taken, as a courtesy, and she stood there in a dead man's coat with her healed-over frostbite hands, and she did not fall down. "How much?" she said. Boyd named a figure. It was more money than I'd seen in one place in a decade. "By spring," she said. "By spring." She nodded once, like he'd told her the time of day. "Then I'll bring it by spring," she said, and turned and walked back into the cabin and left me and Boyd standing in the cold. Boyd looked at me, gave me a look I didn't care for. "Kettle," he said. "Word of advice, one old-timer to another. Woman like that, cracked woman, widow with nothing and nowhere. She'll fasten onto whoever's nearest and she'll bleed him dry and she'll—" I don't remember deciding to take hold of his bridle. My hand was just there on the cheek-piece of his bit, and his good horse threw its head, and I said, in a voice I hadn't used on a man in 20 years, "You'll want to be down the road now, Harmon." He went down the road. I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds. I know the shape this story wants to take, the old man defending the widow's honor, and then the two of them fall in love, and it's all very neat. And some of that's even true. But the truth is more crooked than that, and the crooked part is the part that matters, so here it is. That night, Nora made me a proposition. Not the kind you're thinking. She'd done the sums, she was better at sums than me, remember, and she'd figured that with my few head of cattle and her back and both our labor, there might be a way to make the money by spring. Cut wood for the mine at Coldwater, they always wanted wood and paid cash. Trap some. Sell my 2 spare horses. It'd take everything we both had, every hour of daylight and half the dark, all winter, no rest, no ease. She laid it out like a general laying out a campaign. And at the end of it she looked at me and she said, "I won't take charity, I'll take a partner. Those are different things. If you help me save that claim, I'll owe you half of it in writing, and you'll never have given me a single thing for free in your life. That's the only way I'll do it. Charity, I'll walk back out into the snow. But a debt I can carry. A debt I know how to carry." And I understood her completely, because I'd have said the same, because we were the same animal. Here's the morally heavy part, the one I said I'd give you. I did not want to save the Vane claim. I'll tell you why, and it's not a pretty why. I wanted her to stay. Not out of love, or not only, not yet, but out of the plain animal fact that for the first winter in 30 years I hadn't been alone, and I was afraid of the day the road cleared for good, and she went back to that house across 2 ridges, and I was left with my ledger and my mean old horse and the count of everything the country ever took, and now with her name added to it. Woman, Nora, Spring. Filed under gone. If I helped her save the claim, I helped her leave. If I didn't help her, if I let the sums come up short, if I dragged my feet, If I let spring come and the money not be there, Boyd took the claim, and she had nowhere to go and she'd stay. She'd have to. I sat up that night with the ledger in my lap, the way I had the night of her fever, and I thought about it. I'm not proud of thinking about it. But I promised you honesty, and here it is. For one long, ugly hour, an old, lonely man weighed a woman's last piece of her dead husband against his own fear of going back to being alone, and it was not a quick or easy or noble thing, the deciding. It was the hardest sum I ever did, and I did it in the dark, and Nora asleep 6 feet away trusting me, which made it worse. I'll tell you what turned it. It wasn't nobility. I'd like to say it was, but I've quit lying, remember. What turned it was I opened the ledger. I opened it to write something, I don't even know what, some cowardly justification maybe. I've done worse in that book. And I read back over the pages, all the losses, all the theft. Brother Tom, woman bait, no dates because I couldn't stand the dates. And I understood, sitting there, that I had spent my whole life keeping a book of what was taken from me, and I had never once in 61 years kept a single line of what I'd given. Not one entry on that side of the page. The whole ledger was theft. There was no other column. And here was a woman who'd handed me a chance, at the very end of my life, to write something on the other side. To give something so large it might balance the whole rotten book. And I'd been sitting in the dark trying to figure out how to steal from her instead. So I wouldn't be alone, steal from her the exact same way the country had stolen from me all those years. Take the thing she loved because I was afraid of what her leaving would cost me. I closed the book. I did not write in it. In the morning I told her, partner, half in writing. We'd make the money by spring or die trying, and either way I'd never have given her one thing for free. She put out her healed-over hand and we shook on it like two men. And if there were tears in it, they were the freezing kind, the kind that don't mean weakness, just weather. I'll go quick through the winter because you can feel the shape of it, the cutting and the hauling and the cold, the two of us out before light and back after dark, the slow, terrible arithmetic of $1 here and $1 there against a debt that never seemed to shrink. It was the hardest winter's work of my life, and I was happy in it. God help me. Happy in a way I hadn't the sense to recognize at first because I'd forgotten what it felt like. We fought. We fought plenty, two stubborn people running a hard campaign. And the fighting was part of the happiness, though I couldn't have told you that then. She grieved the whole time. I want to be clear about that because there's a lie stories tell where the new thing cures the old wound, and it doesn't work that way. She grieved Elias the entire winter, some nights bad. One night so bad I heard her out at the woodpile at 3 in the morning splitting wood in the dark just to have somewhere to put it. And I did the thing I'd learned. I went and got the second axe and stood beside her and didn't say a word. The grief didn't go away. It just got a partner too. And somewhere in there, I couldn't tell you the day, there was no day, no single moment. Just an accumulation like snow, somewhere in there it became love. The slow kind. The kind that isn't a lightning strike but a thaw, so gradual you don't notice the ice is gone until you see water running where there wasn't any. Neither of us said the word for a long time. We were too old and too hard and too burned for the word. But it was there in the second acts every time, and we both knew it, and not saying it was its own kind of saying it. We made the money. I'll tell you plain because you've earned it, we made it. Just barely. A week before Boyd's spring deadline we counted it out on the table, all of it, coins and creased paper and a bank draft from the mine, and it was enough with $11 to spare. $11, after a whole winter. We laughed at the $11 until we couldn't breathe. The two of us laughed like fools because what else do you do? She rode to Coldwater and paid Harmon Boyd his money in full and got the paper marked clear. The vain claim hers free and outright. And she brought me back a licorice whip from the mercantile like I was a child, and I ate it like one. And then it was spring and the road was open, and the thing I'd been afraid of all winter was right in front of us. She had her claim. She could go back to it. There was nothing keeping her in my cabin anymore. The debt was paid. I owned half a homestead 2 ridges east now, on paper, but the winter that had thrown us together was over, and the reason for it was gone. Here's where I'd give you the neat ending if I was the kind to. I'm not. She went back. She loaded up and she rode east to the vain claim, to the house Elia's built too close to the wash, to the ground she'd broken her shovel in, and she took up her half of it and I stayed at my cabin with my half on paper and my mean old horse, and that's how it was. Because she needed to. Because a woman who has dug a grave with a fence rail does not get free of that ground by having someone love her. She gets free of it, if she ever does, by standing on it in the daylight of her own 2 feet and finding out whether she can bear the weight. She had to go back and live in that house and find out if she could stand it. She had to prove to herself she wasn't the woman crawling through the snow anymore. And no amount of me wanting her to stay had any right to take that from her. I'd learned that much, at least, sitting in the dark with the ledger. But I'll tell you the last thing, and then I'll cut it off before it gets neat, the way the good ones cut off. We're partners, she and I half and half in writing on 2 claims now. She took a half of mine when I made her, fair's fair. And 2 ridges is not so far in spring and summer and fall. And there is a well-worn track between her place and mine now, worn by an old dun horse who's learned a second way home, and I ride it more days than I don't. And she rides it too, and neither of us has said the word yet even now, but we've stopped pretending we won't. And I threw the ledger in the creek, the old one, the book of theft with no other column. I stood on the bank one spring morning and I pitched it into the high water and watched it go, all those undated losses, off downstream to wherever the country takes things, and it felt like nothing I can rightly describe. I keep a new book now, different kind. I only write in it the things I've given and the things I've been given, both columns, and I'll tell you it's a shorter book than the old one, a much shorter book, 61 years against 1 winter. But it balances, first book of my life that ever did. The first entry, I'll tell you the first entry and then I'll let you go because you don't need me to spell the rest. The first entry, top of the first page, is a date. An actual date. The night of the blizzard. I finally learned how to write the dates. And under it in my bad hand it just says, found her, didn't ride past. There's more written after that, but I think I'll keep the rest.